Hi and good afternoon, it's Jim from maverickstar Observatory. In this update there's quite a few things that I really need, maybe if you're one of these people like even I am sometimes, watch the video a couple of times just to get a grab of all the points that I'm trying to make. You'll understand where this is all going and how important it is right now to you, your loved ones, your extended family and your neighbours, and of course your countrymen. So over the last few days we've been looking at how corporations can't be held accountable for human rights violations, and how corporations like Google are, I believe, being asked by governments around the world now to abuse that loophole in the law in order to use the propaganda in circumstances like climate change. Because I don't know whether you're aware of this, but there is a big scandal going on right now around the world with climate change, and this involves people like Al Gore coming out 15-20 years ago saying that there won't be any ice caps on the planet in the next 15 years. Well, that should have been the case 5 years ago, and there was definitely ice caps on this planet 5 years ago, and there certainly is now more ice over the northern hemisphere that has been there since 2012. So what we are seeing is a glacial rebound, which is not being admitted by government world scientists, and I suppose that the reason for that is that they are being brought off. The main point is that if there is a way in which you can violate human rights in order to get your propaganda over, to sway a nation in believing that there is an agenda which is going to happen, and as we've saw them come out, this is a time for an emergency, it requires warlike strategies to deal with this and tackle this issue, then you'll know that there is definitely a clear agenda. But we've showed you a few other things on this channel over the recent weeks. We have given you clear evidence to suggest that CO2 and man-made global warming is a myth and a hoax and a scandal and a scam. Whichever you want to choose one of those words is accurately predicting the situation the way it is right now. What we're trying to do is put pressure right now here in the UK on members of parliament to get the law changed. This isn't going to be an easy thing, because there are human rights in other countries. We've got the European human rights, we've got which is what we have lent from, and you've got the Constitution in America. But basically we all in Europe, in England, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, we all live in a democratic society, and part of the having a democracy is allowing people to have alternative views and being able to freely express those views. It is the foundations of democracy. Now, where we're going to come from with this is, if companies on one hand are allowed to, and corporations are allowed to have the benefit of the protection of human rights, and then not be held accountable for violating those human rights, then this is something that needs to change in a modern democratic or a modern democracy, whichever that country is that has claimed that it will defend the democratic right of life and that living that gives. So you can see where we're going with this and why we're doing this, and I want to get to a point in a minute which I think you may not be too far away from the truth. And what I'm saying is, right now, is there is obviously a lot of effort going into suppressing information regarding alternative views on climate. Now, that even extends, as you've seen, what we was penalised on this channel for by Google. They said a month before they did it that they was going to go after anyone that had an alternative view to climate change, or was climate change deniers, which we're not. We're just not agreeing on what has caused the climate change over the last 30 years or the last 100 years, if you want to go there. And we have showed you evidence that there is definitely cherry picking going on with the data that they're showing you. Now, I have said, simply, is it logic to just use the last 150 years worth of climate history if you are gauging what will happen next in the next 200, 300 years? And I suggested to you, would it be better if we looked at 400 years of history of climate? Would that give us a more accurate viewpoint as to what was going on? Would be able to make predictions based on that. And I think that is what we should be using. We shouldn't just use this little cherry pick data of 150 years or so. And even though they, at least from the 1900s anyway, if you look at the climate chart, you can see that it does appear to be increasing from that point on. But they argue that this is stemming from the Industrial Revolution. Well, again, very easy to disprove, because if they're using charts from 1860, then we can easily do a Google search ourselves or a Wikipedia search ourselves and find out when the Industrial Revolution actually started. And we will see that their charts don't match up with the actual time for the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and that was 1760, at least 100 years before the data that they even show us. Even though they show us from 1880 or 1860 or 1850, which are the majority of the IPCC thermal charts going back over the last 150 years, the rise in temperature doesn't start actually until the 1900s. I mean, it would be so easy for me here at the observatory to show you, as I did do about a month ago now, the rate at which the magnetic North Pole has been migrating from 1900 to 1990. We see at least 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature over that point in time. But for the next, from 1990 to the present time, we see a vast increase of nearly 2 degrees Celsius, or 1.5 degrees Celsius. The point is that from the 1900s to 1990, the magnetic North Pole only migrated around 500 miles, but from 1990 to the present time, it's done over 1,200 miles. So our data would fit even better than what theirs did if we was trying to pull a hoax here and be more convincing. We could do a better job than what the world's governments are now, trying to claim that global warming is caused by CO2 as a result of the Industrial Revolution pumping lots of CO2 into the atmosphere. The point is what we've clearly showed, is that if you look at the last 5 interglacial and glacial periods, you will see that CO2 does not drive up climate, and especially when you compare that with more recent times that we're in right now. If there is a lot more CO2 in the atmosphere than there was during the last interglacial period, then surely right now the temperature should be a lot higher, and they're clearly not. And that is, checkmate as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of educated, rehearsed scientists would definitely agree with me. It's only these governmental scientists that they're relying on, and obviously we know that there must be another agenda here for them to do that. But why would they do that? Okay. If there was going to be a huge catastrophe to fall on us at this point in time, which we are right now, and it's undeniable, you can't deny that fact. I'm pretty sure that these world governments know that. Let's say they knew that we were going back into the next glacial period, which would render 2 parts of this earth uninhabitable. We couldn't grow the crops to manage the 8 billion people that are on the planet right now. We could not do that. But let's say that they knew that, and they knew that at some point the numbers had to be cut dramatically. Then what better way to send people in the direction of the opposite cause of what is likely to be faced by people in the near future? What I'm saying is it a coincidence that they say and claim that it's global warming? Is it a coincidence that all the data that they present can easily be argued against? And if that's the case, then they must know that what we are facing is a return to a glacial period. they must know that they cannot sustain the amount of people that are on this planet right now. They know that at some point in the near future, things have got to change. What that means for me and you is clearly and very likely we're not going to get that lottery ticket to go into one of these bases, even if we would want to. In any case, we're not going to be lucky enough to do that, along with probably, if anything to go on, like the Georgia Guidestone state, 7.5 billion people won't get that lottery ticket, won't be successful at winning that lottery, and the continuity of humankind will rest on just people like the elites, the rich and the wealthy, and what they can cream out of the taxpayers right now. I know all this sounds like conspiracy theory, I know that, and when you're trying to be, let's say a stand-up scientist who's trying to show people the truth, and you're talking about possibilities where there could be many hundreds of deep underground bases built and planned to be built, and when you talk about, on the back of CO2 taxes, CO2 carbon credits and CO2 funding that is raised to the tune of £100 trillion, then there seems to be an angle or a reason to even entertain some of those ideas. Could that £100 trillion be to build more bases? And would the governments of the world, say it was for another reason, in order to build them and in order to house more people during that period of time? If you knew the earth was going to go through dramatic changes, like we've seen in all these films, the last people you're going to tell is going to be the general public. But it doesn't mean that, we're all stuffed and we don't have a choice to make. If we understand that this is what is actually going to happen, and you should be in no doubts that we are about to go through another glacial period, we could have already seen the start of this happening by looking at, the glacial rebound that has occurred in just this year alone, and it hasn't come to an end yet. We are talking 2 million square kilometres of ice rebounded on the northern hemisphere already. If that is anything to go by, we could be entering the next glacial period. That means there is still a bit of time for us to get prepared, and we know what to get prepared for, and we know what to expect, and that is what we're going to be talking about in the future videos. But meanwhile, we are going to try and change the laws with regards to this, because this seems to be what governments are using. I'm talking about this unaccountability for violating human rights by corporations. I believe the governments are using them to enable to get their message across, because that's how desperate they've got at this point. They know that they can't themselves violate human rights, because it states in the act of that law that authorities cannot do this. So if it is an authority that is violating human rights, they'll be in the courts quicker than anything. But what they are doing is relying on corporations like Google to do the dirty work for them, and they know at that same time that they are allowing Google to commit acts against human rights and violate those rights for human beings. And that is something we can put pressure on the government on to do something about. And then if they refuse to do it, then they're refusing to amend laws which suit a more modern democratic society, because I think you would agree with me that this needs to change. You can't have corporations having the best of both worlds, being reliant on the human rights to protect the corporation, and at the same time not being accountable for violating those rights. You can't have that in a modern democratic society. And like I said earlier on in this video, democracy is all about having the freedoms to talk, share ideas and expressions of whatever topic it is you feel fit. That is what democracy is, and that is what all the wars generally have been over in the last 100 years, and that is what we should be trying to keep as pure as possible and still in place for the generations to come. And as we merge into a more technological advanced society where corporations like Google get bigger and bigger, well, surely we cannot allow corporations, as Google has already right now, got more power than some countries and some nations. We can't allow that, because what might happen is they might then declare themselves a world government, and we can't have that. There is nothing wrong with some of the systems that we have in place, and I think you'll agree that in general, life can be great. But when you have corporations like Google, having the best of both worlds, and it is obviously attractable to governments to use them in order to push agendas, like what has happened to this very channel. You saw it happen yourselves. Google threatened they was going to do it, and then Google did it. And why did they do it? It was because we had an alternative view to climate change. And if they're going after climate change deniers or climate change, people with alternative views, then we have to ask that question, don't we? Why is that the case? Why is this topic so taboo with these organisations? And we don't have to look very far, because it doesn't fall far out of alignment with what the governments are trying to push. And not just governments, the world elite. We can't have people, just because they've got telephone numbers in the bank accounts, telling the rest of the world what is best in their opinion. Why do these billionaires become sociopaths and psychopaths once they have a certain amount of money in their account? How come they feel like demigods themselves? Why is that? Guys, a couple of big thank yous. Thanks to all the patrons sticking with us. Thanks to those people that have made a contribution on the PayPal link down there in the description, and special thanks to Kenneth in the United States for your support yesterday. We are hanging in by literally the teeth here at the observatory, and we really don't want to change the way we do business here. We want to keep everyone informed, and we are definitely on your side. So it'd be amazing if a few of you could help support what we're trying to do, because it isn't just for ourselves. We've never charged anything for any of our services. We've always said, pay us what you think. Simple as that. The donation button's there. We don't request an amount. It's entirely up to you. But support us, because not everyone can afford to. Guys, I'm going to say what I usually do. You have an amazing afternoon. Take care of your loved ones, and think about some of the things that we've discussed in here. We are probably going into another glacial period. That's what you have to line your plans up in the future with. As always, bye for now.